I for a long time, this course has been on my mind, and originally the course that I had envisioned was a revision, but instead, it worked out like this. But from the very beginning, I always envisioned that part of the course would include a section on parliamentary procedure. And I explained it several years ago to my pastor that if you have to take this class in order to get ordained, and you have to be ordained in order to pastor a church and conduct a business meeting in the local church, then shouldn't you have to learn a little something about parliamentary procedure, in order to be ordained? And so that's the purpose of this particular session tonight. Let's talk about the purpose and principles of parliamentary procedure, and just look at the how and why of rules of order. Okay. First of all, why have parliamentary procedure? Why fool with such a... First of all, let me say this. Parliamentary procedure was developed in Parliament, as its name suggests, in the British Houses of Parliament, as a matter of conducting business and conducting it in order. And of course, our government, our Congress, the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate appropriated a lot of that protocol in U.S. forms of government as well. But what's the purpose of parliamentary procedure? First of all, first purpose is to establish and maintain order in a meeting. So it's about doing things right and doing them the right way, doing the right things and doing them the right way. Establishing and maintaining order in a meeting. Otherwise, if you have a process, a procedure, you just have total chaos. And so parliamentary procedure helps to establish that order. And the second thing I just said, you'd have chaos. It's to prevent confusion in the transaction of business, so that we're able to get done what we need to get done and minimize the confusion. I know sometimes in church business and church government assembly business, at the General Assembly, I know sometimes you can't prevent all confusion. But some of it is just because parliamentary procedure, it only exists in the business world. So many people are not familiar with it. The only time they've ever seen it is in the church business, and so that's the reason why sometimes you still end up with some confusion nonetheless. A third purpose is to keep the meeting moving, so that when you introduce it, it helps us to keep the flow of the meeting, so that we're not... Have you ever been to a meeting where you didn't get... Parliamentary procedure helps keep the meeting moving. The fourth thing is it provides a voice for all opinions. One of the purposes of parliamentary procedure is so that every opinion has the opportunity to be presented and to be heard. So nobody can leave a meeting and say, well, I didn't have a voice, I didn't get a say, or leave there with something on their mind. It gives that opportunity for every opinion to be heard. And then the fifth principle, which may be the most significant, is to ensure that the minority is heard and respected while carrying out the will of the majority. And so if I ask you what was the most important principle of parliamentary procedure, and you said majority rules. Well, that's only part of it. But majority rule is an important part of parliamentary procedure, but it may not even be the most important part. It's to ensure that the will of the majority is carried out, but that the rights of the minority are not trampled on in the process, so that you're still allowing the minority to be heard and respected while carrying out the will of the majority. Let's talk about some principles of parliamentary procedure. The first one is that there's never multiple things on the floor, at any given time, you're only discussing one subject. And we're going to talk just a minute about how sometimes a motion is made, and then that motion might be amended. And when there's an amendment offered, it's the amendment that is on the floor. So you're still only discussing one thing at a time. An amendment can be amended. And so if you're amending an amendment, you're still only talking about that amendment to the amendment. So that there's only one subject on the floor at any given time. And that's what we're discussing. Sometimes the moderator, and we talked in our last session about parliamentary procedure when it comes to our own meetings. And one of the principles is the speaker shall strictly adhere to the subject that is on the floor. And if he digresses, a moderator's job is to call his attention to, that's what we're discussing at this time. Again, we're helping to keep the meeting moving, helping to keep it flowing, discussing one subject at a time. Second principle. It allows for the full and free discussion of an idea, so that everybody is given the opportunity to discuss freely and discuss fully the idea that is at hand. We'll talk about how valuable the principle is of free discussion and full discussion. In our Senate, the Senate has no law or has no rule against a filibuster. And if you're familiar at all with a filibuster, the speaker can get up and talk about anything. They're not required to talk about the subject that's on the hand either. They can get up and talk about anything they want to talk about. And the idea is we'll take so much time talking about so many different things that eventually the opposition will get tired of it and let us move on, and we'll never actually call for a vote. And so some of the historic filibusters in our Senate have went on for days, and Senate be convened for 24 hours a day basically, where one senator's up reading whatever he is. They tell me one time a guy read out of the phone book. You're just going on and on and on, and preventing the free discussion and the full discussion of the subject that's at hand. And that's a valuable principle that is protected, intended to be protected by parliamentary procedure. And it takes a 2/3 vote, to stop a filibuster, to call for a vote. And so we'll talk more about that a little later on. A third principle is to treat all members fairly and courteously, so that every member is entitled to the same privileges of speech as any other member. And so they all ought to be treated fairly and courteously. Fourth thing, carried back to our previous slide, to carry out the rule of the majority and respect the rights of the minority. And then lastly, to bring together the wishes of all the group. It's bringing together all the group members and their wishes to form a cooperating, united association. Let's talk about the introduction of business. Introducing and disposing of motions. We'll start by talking about making a motion. Anything the organization does is accomplished by introducing it to the association by a motion. So every matter of business, everything that's voted upon, every decision that is made, it commences with a motion. It's introduced through the form of a motion. And so let's talk about the process by which a motion is made. The first step is that the member who wishes to introduce the business, he addresses the chair. Many times that's he stands and gets the attention, and gets the recognition of the chair. When the floor is open for business, Mr. Moderator or Brother Moderator, and the chair then, once recognized, the chair recognizes the minister, gives him the floor, the member. He, once recognized, the member states the motion. He puts forth the motion, and the standard, sometimes men will say, motion, second, the chair. Now, if it's a long, drawn out, complicated motion, he may ask, worded it to be, of being able to. The chair has stated the motion, then the chair asks for discussion. It is polite, the floor first. Protocol. A lot of times in rotate is and free. After a full and free discussion, the chair, or in other words, are y'all ready to call for a vote between the ayes? Once to opposed to the motion, after the voting, the chair declares the motion aye and say no or nay. Then the chair would declare the motion has been defeated. Let me stop just a minute and just, what happens if you can't really tell? In Congress sometimes, Speaker of the House, it's not uncommon to hear the Speaker say, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And, especially if the ayes have it. And then someone usually will call for a division of the House. In our Congress, most of the time, it's done with a roll call vote, because each member then is requested, they're called by name, and you as a constituent have the right to know how your congressman voted upon a certain measure, and so then they would go through the formal counting of the votes, more so than with an order. In our assembly, if there's some question, the moderator may ask for a standing vote, or in some cases a secret ballot. Let's talk about distinction with a motion. Once somebody has made a motion, there's a motion on the floor, it's been seconded, now the floor is open for discussion. What do you do with it? Well, it's on the floor until it's disposed of. And so let's talk about the ways in which a motion can be disposed. First of all, by vote. The most common way to dispose of a motion is by voting on it. Well, it's disposed of. We're ready to move on to the next. The most common method of disposing with a motion. Go back through our minute book, and count the number of motions made, and you'll are disposed of by voting. Prior to the maker states the motion and opens the floor for discussion, the maker of the motion has the prerogative of withdrawing.
What happens if the second is not withdrawn?
I'm not really sure. Typically,
would they second the second, since there's only one
technically, if somebody decides to withdraw a motion, then generally the person who seconded it out of a courtesy,
they would just have to remake.
So if once the maker, and so yes, or ever here talked about it, I'd like to withdraw my motion. Generally speaking, the House gives him permission to do that. There's some people there that just know we're going to vote this thing. We're going to vote this. He's allowed to withdraw it. And so you're not voting on the motion itself yet. You're just voting on whether or not the motion is still on the floor. And it doesn't require a formal motion to withdraw. If nobody objects, another method of disposing of a motion to postpone, a motion may be postponed indefinitely or definitely. All right? If you move to postpone indefinitely, you avoid your motion. Let's put this off indefinitely. Means we're done talking about this. Let's do away with it and move on with it. You're not voting on the motion itself. And you're avoiding any further discussion on the motion. To postpone definitely means that we're going to postpone this until a particular time. So the motion is, I move to postpone until after we come back from lunch, or until tomorrow morning. I move to postpone until 3 o'clock, or whatever the case is. There's a definite time. So at that time, whatever business might be on the floor at that particular, when that is done, then the next order of business would be the postponed motion would come back to the floor. And so, it may be that there's times where you can tell during the discussion of a motion that perhaps really in order to make this thing pass, we need to work some things out. We need to amend it in some way or another. There's something else that needs done. Say, for example, I move to postpone until after the lunch recess. During lunchtime, or I move to postpone until in the morning. Sometime somebody can sit down and work out some details that'll help move the motion to where it can be disposed of in a better way.
Who can call for the postponing? Only the maker of the motion?
Anybody can make a move to postpone. To postpone indefinitely or to postpone definitely. Anybody can make that move. I move to postpone. And again, the move to postpone indefinitely generally is a signal that the motion is dead. We're not going to vote on it. We're not going to kill it outright to defeat them. But we're going we're not going to talk about this now, and we're probably not going to talk about this ever. But the move to postpone definitely when we can work out all the details. But it's a whole lot easier to work this out in a committee. That would move us along much faster than work a motion. Amending a motion. The move to commit this, to refer this to a committee. And the committee will discuss the motion in detail and come back with a recommendation. Okay? Something on the floor as it's being discussed, there's a loophole, there's just something that ain't quite, that again, working out on the floor, we're not going to be able to come to a satisfaction. There's still some valid points in this, and we just work some bugs out of it or what have you, and to commit, and then the committee would later on bring back their report and vote on it.
So for the commit one, it would be like a couple of years ago when we updated the teaching against like homosexuality and stuff.
Yes.
That it was committed to a committee. They came back with what they found and proposed, and then the delegation voted on it.
Yeah. Here's a recommendation. Yeah. Exactly. And typically, the move to commit, puts it in the hands of the committee, and then whatever special assignment you might give them with it, sometimes it's committed with instructions. So, the instruction is take this, work it out, we want you to do this, this, and this, and bring back their business. There were some things to work, and resubmit it, what have you. As this coming year is going to be election year, there may be a lot of stuff, it may require a second day's business. Refer to something to a committee in the morning or what have you, and then report, and sometimes you answer some questions to, that maybe would bring back the motion to lay on the table temporarily. So we're going to stop dealing with this to talk different than the motion to postpone. Again, its purpose comes from the need, we need to deal with, and generally the move, Chairman, in order to more people, this particular pressing, lay it on the table, and so the motion as it was made, even a motion to commit, to refer it to, and then
In business, the end of the
table is because you got something that's more pressing right now. The same thing when the business session closes. The table that was tabled a month ago, the table they're calling. And then, rather, is the voting methods, mentioned very briefly, is, again, the chair asks for those in favor to say aye, those who are opposed to say nay. The chair generally concludes from the voice chairman to ask for a hand count. Now, especially if you're in a small group, like if we say all in favor, just raise your hand. Do that, you can just count the hands and then move forward. Sometimes, it says all in favor. How many said sit down, and then all the is a standing vote. It requires a 2/3 majority. A motion to amend the bylaw to ask for somebody to stand in order to. And then a last method, choices regularly. They're used for election. Locally, he's voting his conscience. He asked to particular candidate or nominee. Now let me require a majority vote or votes that are, stand for the 50 vote. And it doesn't count as basically, then in an elders meeting, 12 elders 0, and so
If what? If
it's 2/3 of the vote, and so those so voting, there's to be a better vote. He's still elected as his opportunity to vote. Yeah, but if it's anybody else, called for is you nominated are really slim because nobody. But kinds of motions. Just a minute. First of all, unclassified motions. These motions enable certain items to be reconsidered. In general, they're brought up when no business is pending. And so there might be, for example, the motion to take from the table is an unclassified motion. Generally done, there's nothing else on the floor, and we're at a point in the business where we're ready for the next order, nothing on the agenda, and so you could make a motion to take from the table. Sometimes the motion to reconsider, if there's a move that was made and voted upon, and then later in the business somebody decided the wrong way, I'd like to make a move that we reconsider the voted. So for example, if you make a motion and you voted the motion down, say the motion was defeated, someone could make a motion to reconsider the move and to bring it back up for consideration. Now, let me say this. Move to reconsider can only be made by somebody who voted in the opposite. So you can only make a motion to reconsider a move if you voted the other way, if you've changed your mind on the issue. And so it's not used very much because of that. But and then the other unclassified move is the move to rescind. So for example, if you voted to do something, and then later on decide, and to undo the actions that were or to undo the move that was made. These are unclassified motions that bring business to the group, that allow formal discussion of an item being brought before the group. They're general motions. A third type is something of a main motion. These are the kinds of motions that I just talked about in that last slide. These are motions that directly apply to the motion that's on the floor. So the motions that can hasten action upon, delay action upon, or modify the main motion. Move to lay on the table, to the move to commit, or the move to amend. There's also another subsidiary motion that sometimes gets misused, is the motion to call for the previous question. And the motion to call for the previous question means I move that we stop debating and go straight to the vote. And so the move for the previous question requires a second and requires a 2/3 majority vote. So the idea is that if you're going to stop talking about something and go straight to the vote, when nobody else is allowed to talk on this issue, that should only be done when 2/3 of the members are in favor of it. So anything that would be used to suppress the discussion of a motion should require 2/3 majority vote. So the move to call for the previous question requires a second and a 2/3 majority vote. Again, I move that we stop talking about it and let's vote on it. Then there's incidental motions. These motions deal with questions of procedure. They arise out of another pending motion or an item of business. Usually they're points of order. They're not debatable. Usually they're points of order. A move to appeal the decision of the chair. Sometimes the move to close or reopen nominations would be an incidental motion, and the move to suspend the rules would be an incidental motion. And again, suspension of rules, you can only suspend the rules if the rules provide for a method of their suspension. So to suspend our bylaws, you can only do it if the bylaws specify the circumstances under which they can be suspended. And then the last type, and the most important, again, these are in reverse order of their precedence. Most important, privilege motions, they do not relate to the pending question. But they're matters of such urgency or importance that without debate, they'll interrupt the consideration of anything else. And so these are moves to call for the orders of the day or a motion to adjourn. You hear somebody say sometimes, motion to adjourn is always in order. It's a privileged motion. So even when something else is on the floor. 5 types of motions. Any questions on them?
Just a quick question. I know that what I've noticed in the last couple of meetings that, especially when you're going to be voting on a particular committee or someone's running one of those guys every time, cease and desist. There's an incidental motion where you could make a motion to open the court to end. How would you have that opportunity to do that? Do you just remain standing with your hand up, or how does it work?
I just, we've abused the motion to close the nominations. I know we've abused that. We had a general officer in the past who, when it was time to open the floor for nominations, he would ask all of those who have a nomination, please stand. And then they would stand, and he'd start in the back, like, parliamentary procedure calls for, start at the back and move his way forward, let each man make his nomination. When everybody who was standing is now seated, then he'd say, if there are no other nominations, I'll entertain a motion to close the nominations. The chair should never entertain a motion to close the nominations when there are first of all, the man doesn't have the floor. You're not been recognized or what have you by the chair. If there are men that are still standing, to make nominations, the chair shouldn't recognize that move at all. Now, of course, the regress that you have against that is if he does, there is a move in a second, then, obviously, you could call for a point of order and say, brother, I was standing to be recognized to make a nomination and hold off on it or what have you until you were able to make your nomination or until all the nominations were made. You can vote no to the closing of the nominations. You have that privilege. To ask for the floor to be reopened for nominations would take a little bit more maneuvering, and the challenge there is, if you didn't challenge the closing of the nominations, there have been occasions where we've closed the nominations and then realized we had more people decline. We had a committee of 5 and we had 4 nominated. And we've done voted to close. So then you have to have a motion to reopen the floor for nominations under those circumstances. So I think we probably need to do a better job, from our organization standpoint, of giving every person who has that, again, the easiest way to do that, everybody who has a nomination, please stand. And then just call on, if you don't have a nomination that's burning on your heart and whatever, and you're willing to stand when everybody else stands, wait to see who else is nominated or whatever. It's not a valid reason to formulate a nomination. Everybody ought to stand together, and then it should just be a matter of principle that everybody who's who was asked to stand has given their nomination, and now we're ready for a move to close. It's a formality to close the nomination. So, yeah, I mean, it is. There was a move in 2004. No, I'm sorry. There was a move in 1996 to reopen the nominations for one of the offices after it had voted to close. Move failed, but we took the vote on the two that were nominated. But at any rate, again, it's possible. Any other questions on motions, types of motions, precedents? Talk about elections real quickly. Nominations are generally made from the floor by members. And though it's a form of a motion, it's not, they need not be seconded. Generally, a motion and second are required to close the nominations, vote. Election takes place by ballot. Like we said earlier, if one candidate is nominated, a yes/no vote is taken. A candidate must receive a majority of all eligible votes cast in order to be elected. Nomination is just a formality. It is not a requirement for election. However, the likelihood of an election by a candidate not placed in nomination is marginally slim. I mean, if you just had a big writing campaign, just wrote it, and managed to get a majority, then I'd really be interested in seeing how you managed to do that. A rule requiring officers to be elected by ballot cannot be suspended by a unanimous vote, because the rule protects a minority of one from exposing his vote. And this he must do if he votes openly in the negative or objects to giving general consent. Nor can this result be accomplished by voting that the ballot of the assembly be cast by the secretary or anyone else, as this does away with the essential principle of the ballot, namely secrecy. And so, I'm reading directly from Robert's Rules of Order. If it is desired to allow the suspension of a bylaw that cannot be suspended under these rules, then it is necessary to provide in the bylaws for its suspension. And so, there would have to be talked about these things, didn't it? The last area that I'm going to look at is business meetings in local church. I want to throw some guiding principles on conducting of local church business. It is true that in some ways the business of the General Assembly is not as complicated or as sophisticated as business is done by Congress or Parliament. And so sometimes I know that business sometimes is necessary as well. And so principles out of an article from many-year-old, I found this article online, and I thought it still had some very valid. Stuff. A church business meeting differs from the typical parliamentary session of a secular group in which Robert's Rules of Orders sets the pattern of procedure. And so consequently, the usual order will be modified. Though many of the basic principles of parliamentary law are valid, it will be profitable to note the differences in a principle as a basis for the differences in procedure. Okay? So, in the first place, the church is not democratic. All right? Just understand the difference. The church is not democratic. It is not governed on the basis of majority rule with protection for the minority. Rather, it is highly selective in its membership and strictly intolerant of minorities. As a consequence, its voice is unanimous on all important issues and tends to be unanimous on small issues. Okay? There is a commendable reluctance to proceed with the new roof for the church building as long as there is a distinct opposition. church voted to do it, but there's still a handful of people in the church that are really adamantly opposed to doing it. You could say, majority rules, bless God. This is what the majority voted to do, and you can cause more harm to the local church by doing what the majority ruled to do than by not doing it. Even such minor items as the repair of the furnace are part of the Lord's work. And as far as possible, the church should be united in its program on these small matters. Let me say, the first item on the agenda is unity. So don't underestimate the power of church business to bring division and strife and disharmony into the local church body. The first item is unity. What can we do to ensure that the church is united, to bring us in? Now, I'm not talking about empowering a local church boss that has to make every decision. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about championing the principles of unity. I'm talking about giving voice to, we want to do what, so-and-so says to do, and this and that and the other. But doing all we can to protect and guard the unity of the church. Now, because there's no place for a minority faction, the completely open session really is never sanctioned. That the business to come before the whole body should be carefully prepared in advance by a small group in order to do that. Do as little business as possible in the meeting itself. So, talked about in all kinds of discussion, about, and you realize right away, we're not going to get this thing done with 112 delegates trying to all talk about this and whatever. The best thing to do is a smaller group, work out a plan and bring it. And we talked about the resolution committee in the last session. The resolution committee's job is to take those new resolutions and to compare them to existing resolutions, to discuss needed changes with the presenter. The best thing the resolution committee can do is to talk with the submitter and say, listen, this is not going to work. The best thing you can do is let's make some modifications and to present resolutions that have the best chance of being adopted. To work all that, to talk about all those things, pros and cons, to work it all out before it ever hits the delegation floor. And the same thing is true in the local church, maybe even on a larger basis. That things that aren't going to take a moment to negotiate with the owner of the property and to get that done first, than to have a meeting, talk about it, and then go back to the owner and him not even want to fool with you. So do as, because of that, the opening of the floor for business, which any member may propose, is not, I'll tell you something, there's nothing scarier than what happens after that moment when a pastor says, is there any new business? There's just nothing, being blindsided by whatever might come up or whatever. And so deal with as much, and there's so many things, do as little business as possible in the meeting itself. You go back through some old church minutes from different congregations, whatever, through the years. It's amazing the kinds of things that were discussed and voted upon in church business meetings. I heard about one pastor said they talked for 45 minutes in the church business meeting about whether or not to buy a new vacuum cleaner. Really? I mean, if the church doesn't need a new vacuum cleaner, then don't buy it. If the church that you can deal with, prior to the meeting, and it's quite possible, a lot of things people want to talk about openly and what have you, that probably you can get a lot more done. And the way a lot of times have one annual business meeting, if you wait around for the annual business meeting to roll around, you may have missed all the opportunities to get done whatever it was that you needed to get done anyway. And so do as little as possible. Another issue, and let me just say too, on that last point, that problems that, they're oftentimes referred back to somebody to get more information anyway. So why not deal with it up ahead of time? Any procedure that hints of controversy, it should really be dealt with a smaller group first, that you work out some things and whatever before you bring that to a matter to the whole group. Here's the fourth thing. Strict adherence to parliamentary law may be counterproductive. Parliamentary procedure must be varied sometimes in line with these differences in objective. We've got a different objective in mind. Or just one example. Just one example. Ordinarily, the standard way to do business is a motion and a second, restated by the chair, and then an opportunity for discussion. Most of the time in local churches, that's almost counterproductive. You're better off first by having at least some discussion, by letting the person who's presenting the motion, for example, maybe bring it up through a discussion, talking about the principles involved. It may be even in order to fully discuss the subject and then say, now that we've kind of come to some idea of what we want to do, can I have a formal motion in a second to do what we just discussed? It may be that the way the motion would be made in the beginning, it's not at all the way the motion would end up, and so sometimes in the local church, it might be better, it might be more conducive to business to allow for a full discussion, and then the pastor moderator say, what's your pleasure? How should we deal with this and call for a vote? Another thing that's true to that too is typically the chairman should be responsible for moderating the business and shouldn't give his decision or his opinion on a chair without without the chair being fulfilled, or what, he shouldn't give his opinion on a subject or whatever. Well, can you imagine trying to do business without knowing what the pastor thinks about it? I mean, without getting some feedback from the what do you think we should do? And so again, a strict adherence to parliamentary procedure. Can you imagine a pastor strictly following the guidelines of parliamentary procedure, never sharing his opinion on a matter? After the business meeting is over, you find out the pastor was dead against 4 things that you did in that meeting, and why would you? Or worse than that, maybe even have the pastor resign because of something that you voted to do. I don't know. I can't stay there because of that. So again, you're better off a lot of times to discuss a subject rather than a motion. Talk about election procedure. Again, unity is the primary goal in the business of the church. And so when it comes to elections, the election of officers, for example, here again, the procedure is not wholly democratic. And of course, according to our bylaws, the nomination of the local officers is done by the pastor. And so some would say, well, that's not even, that's not democratic at all. That's almost like a dictatorship. Now, of course, he's only nominating, and it's still up to the church to vote yes or no on those elections. Is there any benefit in announcing the number of no votes on a particular election? So you have an election for the clerk or what have you, and, is there any benefit that comes from having announced to the, if you've got tellers or trustees or your clerk, whoever's counting the votes and whatever, they come to the conclusion that, that there were more yeses than there were noes, is there any benefit from having announced, well, he got 5 no votes? Is there any? The principle, again, is protecting the unity of the church. We have, for the last several years, since the bylaws changed now to where there's no open nominations for the officers and the pastor, nominates those officers, I always put together a ballot with the position and the person who's been nominated and a place for them to circle yes or no. And so we have our vote in that manner, and then the votes are counted, and then it's announced they were all elected. So again, now the clerk might make a note in the minutes of what the actual vote count was or what have you, but for the record's sake, but again, it's of no value to and it may be counterproductive in actually announcing that there was opposition. And then just a last, just respect people's times. People's time. If you get people to show up for a business meeting, we've been, since I've been pastor, we've been having business meetings on Sunday nights at the conclusion of service. I don't like it. I honestly don't like it at all. I've said that several times. And just in the absence of doing anything else, it's just a necessary evil. It's just the best time to do it because we're all, for the most part, members are already there. You can announce it a few weeks ahead of time or whatever, and just get it done. But you have a worship service, and there's going to be a business meeting that follows, and the only thing maybe worse than having a business meeting right after church is maybe having a business meeting right before church. That'd be the only thing I can think of. But the truth is, in old days, we'd have church business meeting, and you'd have it on an off night or whatever, and you wouldn't have anybody show up. And so, if you have people who stick around for a business meeting, people come to a business meeting, then respect their time. Stick to the agenda and keep the business, flowing. And I'm not talking about just, you say, well, what would any point in us even being here then if all that we just get. But at the same time, we don't have to be here all night either. If there's a valid reason for lengthening, the meeting, then do it. But respect people's time and stick to the agenda and get done what you came to do, and parliamentary procedure in Congress, in the Assembly, or in the local church. All right. If not, next week we will have a final exam. Anybody have any questions about that? Anybody, got something that heard about, or you